So we are live from the Pantheon of Pedagogy, the Mecca of Methodology, your vacation from vacation, the educational cavern where you can learn to seriously take teaching not so seriously. This is, and we are,
Classroom Hacks.
Wow, that was a lot better, and we even added our own echo to that.
We did.
Mind's blown on that one.
We're learning as we go.
And we are. And before we get into that, I'm Eric Tan.
And I'm Peter Kinetis.
And we are live here from the Mecca of Methodology, otherwise known as the bathroom stall at College of DuPage.
Yeah, second floor,
Exactly.
south bathroom.
Right, come find us one of these days.
Well, that's the only space that we could afford as far as rental fee.
You know, it's not the tops, but I guess it's as low as you can go.
I still have toilet paper on my shoe. And we teach at College of DuPage in Glen Ellen, Illinois. And we don't do this podcast because we think we know more than other teachers, but we just realized one day, Eric and I, while we were in the faculty lounge, we love talking about a lot of things, including teaching. And we hear a lot of good ideas from other teachers. We steal a lot of good ideas from other teachers, whether it's in discussion or reading articles or books or going to seminars. So we thought, hey, let's lay these down on a podcast and get them going, because we listen to other teaching podcasts as well.
And I think steal is such a harsh term. I think it's better described as we hear these other ideas and we talk about them and we don't give credit. I think that's easier to go with, right?
Well, I think you just defined steal.
Well, now you're just splitting hairs at this point.
Yeah, but yeah, and steal, I mean that in the fun sense of.
Oh, absolutely.
We gain and we build on, what do they say? We stand on the shoulders of the giants who have come before us.
Right, and in this case, we stand on the shoulders of the adjuncts we are trying to get ahead of in life.
Yes, at any cost?
At any measure.
So are you saying it's kind of like survival of the fittest?
I don't know if we're the fittest, but I would definitely say survival.
Okay, that sounds good.
At the cost of survival. A little bit of housekeeping. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of touch on from our previous Ethos, Pathos, and Logos episode?
I thought we covered a lot of ground there. There's always more that you can say on these subjects, but right now I think I'm good. How about you?
We kind of ended the last episode speaking about an emotion in regards to teaching where there was a subject and we really got emotionally involved, and I kind of put a pin in that and we saved it for this episode. So let's kind of get into that a little bit. For those of you who don't remember, this episode's focus is on evolution and longevity. And I'm not speaking about Darwinism here, but I'm speaking of your own teaching evolution, Pedro's and mine, our specific and respective evolutions, and then longevity in the classroom. How do you maintain a longer shelf life as an instructor to kind of keep going with certain vigor? And, that's applicable, I think, to any job where unless it's the absolute job that you are so passionate about that it becomes your life's work. I think everyone gets to a point in their field where they have to kind of reinvent themselves or reinvent their class. And so that's kind of what we're going to look at today. So in regards to evolution, Pedro, do you remember your first day of class, your first day of teaching?
Well, just if I can go back to something you said a minute ago. Yeah, you said, hey, evolution, we're not speaking of Darwinism. That's a good point because evolution has many definitions, mm-hmm. So we just mean the simple definition of change over time. And, we line up a picture of ourselves mm-hmm. from every birthday, from every year. We can say, hey, there's the evolution of me, how I've changed over time. So
do you remember your first day of class?
I do. It was about almost 18 years ago.
Wow.
And I started teaching in high school. I started not when I was in high school.
Oh, okay.
I started teaching high school. I've been teaching college now for 7 years, but high school 18 years ago. And I was bright-eyed and thought that I started off subbing. So mm-hmm. This was in Los Angeles Public High School. I remember wearing a tie that day. I think that was the only day I ever wore a tie. Mm-hmm. To at least when I taught public school. And it was so funny because I thought I'm going to go in there and be like Robin Williams from Dead Poets Society and inspire them. And I had this little handout for them about Abraham Lincoln, how he had so many setbacks in life and he still achieved. And I just remember trying to go through that with them. And within like a minute, they were taking my handout and turning them into paper airplanes and throwing them across the room. And I thought, okay, maybe a bit too of an idealistic picture I had on my first day.
So you went from being Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society to being Michelle Pfeiffer in Dangerous Minds, is what you're saying.
or maybe Robin Williams in Dead Poet Society to Robin Williams in Jumanji.
Yeah, there you go. The only thing that was missing were the rest of the zoo animals to kind of plow through the classroom.
Yeah, I was pretty much overtaken by the students. And it wasn't out of control or anything. They were nice.
Sure.
It was just they weren't in the mood for this.
Sure, and to speak to your point, it's amazing what our perspective is and perception is going into a class, what we think we are going to do, and then kind of getting hit in the face with the reality of the classroom. And this is just to clarify that everyone's experience is going to be different. Not every class is going to be a Dangerous Minds or a Dead Poets Society. And it doesn't mean that when you go into a classroom, you can't change perspective and alter the tone and mood of a class. But the reality is that a lot of times what we think is going to be something and what it actually is tends to be somewhere in the middle of what it ultimately turns out to be.
Well, let me ask you, do you remember the first day of your teaching experience?
Oh, absolutely. It was in 2011, and it was the fall semester. I had always wanted to go into class, and it was a mixture of elation, excitement, but also nervous energy because I had no real educational background other than I was a grad school tutor at the Writing Center, but I had never taught in front of a big class before, or at least a class of 25 kids. And so,
was it here at COD?
No, this was at Joliet Junior College.
Okay.
So there's a part of me that I always told myself I wanted to take the elements of the teachers that I saw that I enjoyed, that I thought were effective, that I thought were good, and apply them to my class. But then there was also the part of me that was scared, part of my French here, scared crapless because I didn't want to step on any toes. I had just gotten this job. I didn't want to lose it. I didn't want to offend anybody. So, I kind of stepped in there. And I don't think I've ever admitted this to anyone, and I don't know, and I don't work at JJC anymore, so it's not going to stomp on any toes, but I wanted to see my initial class reaction, and so I sat in the back, and I pretended to be a student, and I waited, and I waited
now,
for
those
everyone.
of you who don't know Eric, he has a young-looking face. This is the type of face that when he's 50 someday, he'll still look 30, so he can get away with this.
I don't know about that. I maybe young at heart.
You have good skin. It's very nice.
The nicest compliment I had ever received was, "You have a face for radio, but you don't have a voice for it." And I said, "That's why I'm going to make a podcast."
Oh,
so
that's not true.
I have a place to be. No, that never actually happened to me. But what did happen was I sat in the back of the class pretending to be a student because I started teaching when I was 26, 25 at this point. I forget how old I was.
Yeah.
Because I've been doing this for 6 years now. And I waited to see how long students would wait. I gave them about 5 minutes, and there were no riots. No one rebelled and said, "He's not coming, let's get out of here." But I kind of went up to the class, and they were surprised. And it was just one of those things that I wanted to kind of see myself. But then obviously that's when my anxiety kicked in because I was like, "Oh man, did I overstep a boundary? Did I not do?" And then for like 3 weeks after that, I kind of just stuck to the gun, stuck to the book, and didn't get outside of my comfort zone because I was very nervous. But that was my first day of class, and I just kind of took attendance, and I went with what was expected, and I didn't have a Jumanji-like moment like Pedro, but I just had students who were just also getting adjusted. They were there their first day. Some didn't want to be there. There were a couple that were overzealous, taking notes of everything I said, but to kind of summarize it, it was that sort of nervous excitement that was there. And then you kind of go on and you go through the rest of the semester, and then you start to get hit with some of the other first year sort of pitfalls. And we're kind of segueing into that. Do you remember any of the things that kind of stressed you out the most the first few years of teaching?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm going to jump ahead in time a little bit because my first few years of teaching were substitute teaching.
Yeah.
If I can jump to when I started teaching full time.
Sure, that's fine.
What stresses me out still to this day, years later, is will this work in class tomorrow? Mm-hmm. I have this planned, and I think it's good, but will it work? And I feel that it's so funny. Time goes on, and you feel more confident as a teacher. But at least for me, there's always that part of me, that doubt. I remember reading a book. It was so comforting to read a book by what many people consider to be a teaching expert, been teaching for 30 years, and how he was saying that he still feels like he's learning, getting the gist of it now. And so that's what it feels like. It feels like the name of our show. Gosh, am I really just a classroom hack? And then something goes well and you feel like, okay, I'm progressing here as a teacher. But then the next day or the next class even, it could go not work as well, and then the self-doubt. So I've learned to try to take things in the long haul. I don't base everything just on 1 hour, 1 day, one class. You just have to think more of a marathon than a sprint.
Yeah, and to speak to your point about when we start teaching, we're doing all these different sort of song and dances and learning to step properly. And then you learn that eventually when you get your footing, that's when you learn how to do the confidence. And this idea of going in there and really second guessing yourself, I think, is what some instructors face initially.
Did you say the confidence?
Yeah, that's how they do it from England to France.
Okay.
It's a little bold step called the confidence.
Okay.
And at least speaking personally, some of the things that I dealt with late at night, I had bad habits teaching initially because I wasn't organized as well as I am now, and that's something. If you want any advice, first and foremost, is get organized, because when you're not organized, it makes it easy for things to sort of pile up and for you to believe that there's a lot more going on than there actually probably is.
What's an example of being well organized, would you say?
So for me, I keep a flash drive on me. I keep multiple flash drives on me because I back things up all the time. But also if you get Dropbox or Google Drive, you can save all your files there. And as you go on throughout your teaching tenure, you can save those files. And then eventually what's also helpful is that you have all these lesson plans that you've taught, and sometimes all you need to do is tweak them. Sometimes all you need to do is modify them, and you don't have to stress late at night. And we'll get into that in the longevity form. But in terms of my initial aspects, I was up 2, 3 in the morning because I was either grading real late, I tried to grade everything at once, or I was really second guessing, as Pete brought up, am I a classroom hack? Are they going to get it? How am I going to reach these kids? And that was one of those things why we say at the top of the show, why we try to teach how to seriously take teaching not so seriously, is because when you do and you keep yourself up at night, it can be detrimental to the next day. And for an example, when I was at JJC and I started over here at COD as well, my days would start at 5 a.m. because I would have to get up, get ready. I wanted to get to school ahead of everyone else, get everything printed I needed to, get everything set and organized. But sometimes I'd be up till 2 or 3 in the morning the night before, grading, questioning, being overcritical about what I was going to teach. And so you're going on 2-3 hours of sleep, going into work, putting in a 12-hour day, and then going back and doing it all over again. That is a way to really run yourself into the ground. And so if there's any advice I can give you is to, 1, stay organized, 2, take a step back sometimes from just going all in early on. Even if you need to take an hour or 2 a night just to get away from it all, do so. And then also make sure you get enough rest. Can't stress that enough. And we'll speak more about that once we get into the longevity aspect of it. Anything to add to that, Pedro, about some initial experiences?
Yeah, and early on in my teaching career, I was more teacher-centered, where the old saying now is I tried to be the sage on the stage. You hear that phrase used a lot. So it was very content-driven. But over the years, talk about evolution became more student-centered teaching or learner-centered teaching. That really, once I was introduced to that really changed the way not only that I teach in the classroom, but also how I prepare. And the reason why I think so many of us are content-focused as teachers is because we were modeled that when we were in school. The teacher gives us all the information, we write it down, we take notes, we do papers on it, we're tested on it, and therefore we've learned it. But now, and you and I always talk about this, the idea that it's not just how much information the teacher knows, it's not, the main thing is just to lecture. And don't get me wrong, sometimes we need to lecture. I mean, and I'm not putting down lectures in and of themselves, but if that's the only thing we do, then I think we put more pressure on ourselves to be this. Because sometimes if it was, say it was an area of philosophy or religion that I was not as familiar with, I'd have to put so much more prep time into it just to make sure that I'm the expert the next day. And we should always try and be experts in what we do and grow in our knowledge. We know that. But the idea of, wait a minute, it's not how much I know, it's what I can teach them to do something, to think critically, to take this knowledge that we are learning and how do I understand it, how do I synthesize it, how do I evaluate it, how do I apply it to my own life. So that has made it a much more vibrant classroom and dare I say, more fun.
Totally agree. In regards to learning-centered versus student-centered, the type of teachers we are, we'll touch on that after our commercial break from our sponsors, and when we get into the sort of longevity of how to maintain a longer passion for the job that we do. And we'll be right back.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
We are back, and we've moved on to the longevity aspect of this discussion. And when I speak about longevity, I'm really talking about not change over time, as we talked about evolution, but the extension of the time that you are doing these things. Pedro and I, when we go into the part-time faculty center, we're surrounded by a variety of different kinds of instructors. Some have been doing it for 30, 40 years, and those who have been doing it that long, you get a little bit of a mix of a bag. Some who wake up every day and still love what they're doing, and then others who you can clearly see their spirit has been crushed, and they're just kind of going through the motions. And what we'll try to look at is why. How does someone get to that point, and how can we potentially avoid that? And again, we don't have all the answers, but from our observations, we can kind of give some potential insight as to why someone gets to this point and any way we could potentially avoid that as well. So, Pedro, how do you keep a stable mind through this thing we call teaching?
It's a wonderful question. It could be answered in so many ways and come at it from many different angles. But one thing I wanted to address was being haunted by the students that you didn't reach. You know, we're trying to get to as many as possible. And say you get the evaluations back at the end of the semester, and out of a class of 30, 28 seem to get something positive or helpful or beneficial or meaningful out of the class, but then say 2 or 3 didn't. And though there's 28 that responded positively, it's the 2 or 3 that will haunt me and will keep me up at night, so to speak. And I think part of longevity is not to be haunted, and this is something I'm still working on, not to be haunted by the 2 or 3 in the way where it does keep me up at night, but as we know, to learn from it and say, okay, what is there merit to what they're saying? How can I apply their critique and make me a better teacher, rather than just thinking, oh, I stink, I suck, and to try to, as hard as it is sometimes, it's the 2 that didn't like you that override the 28 that did sometimes. And I think part of longevity is not to be burnt out by the times where we do get criticism, constructive or otherwise.
And as the great Disney philosopher Elsa once said, let it go. And I would sing that, but we don't have enough money to challenge a lawsuit right now. And speaking to the idea of stability is, to piggyback off of Pete's point, is to first and foremost not lose sight of yourself and not lose sight of what you want to get out of a class. The other thing is to be flexible with not only your teaching style, but to also be flexible and understanding with the people that you are teaching. And at least for me personally, I found that compassion for your students and compassion for yourself tends to breed a longer shelf life, because you sort of eliminate some of the ego that you might have going into it. If you stick so strongly to your own beliefs, and you think that everything you're doing is right or everything that you're doing is gospel, and then when you're challenged and you realize that you may not be correct about a certain stance, it can be defeating to you. But if you are flexible, and if you are like the elder reed opposed to that rigid branch, you can last a lot longer. And Pete's looking at me like, what does that even mean?
I realize I'm in the presence of greatness with some of these metaphors and terms, illustrations that you use. I'm enjoying them.
I had a friend who was on Facebook yesterday, and she just recently received a job over at my old stomping ground, and she was asking any advice for a first-year teacher. One thing that I could tell her was, you're going to go through a lot of the ups and downs that many of us go through, late nights, grading, feeling empathy, or feeling apathy or lethargy from students, but you always have to remember that you're going to reach certain students, and it means a lot to them, especially if you can be there for them, or you can teach them something or get them to think critically outside of a box they might not have normally have seen. And we've touched on that a little bit in previous episodes.
Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
I was thinking of this when you were just talking now. I was thinking, there's an old proverb that says, plans fail for lack of counsel. Mm-hmm. So when I do get challenged by, say, an evaluation or something, even in classroom where students questioning what is going on or what I'm doing, it's always good, and I have to remind myself to bounce this off as many people as, if not as many, at least a handful, to help get perspective.
Yeah.
Because if I'm operating in a vacuum, just thinking through this myself, sometimes my perspective is skewed because I'm in the middle of it.
Sure.
But obviously, you're one person I talk to. There's 3 or 4 others, other teachers I talk to, where I bounce these ideas off of them and say, what do you think, to help get perspective?
And perspective, I think, is crucial, especially when we are learning from each other. We're learning from our students. As we were talking about earlier in this episode, personally, things that have helped me maintain focus and keep going. 1 is organization. 2, having references to all my previous class templates. Like I said, I have a flash drive, I have a Dropbox, and in each of those areas, I have every single class that I have taught for the time that I've taught. And each one of those has the lesson plan I did that day, has everything that we might have discussed. And what that allows me to do is sort of tweak what I might have done, or update or revise the particular lesson plan, so that if the topic changes, if a topic maybe goes out of style, if a point of discussion maybe becomes more relevant, I can simply substitute that, add it in, and then replace the old one. Additionally, take some time for yourself, even if you have to step away. One thing I did early on was I tried to grade everything all in one night. That was not helpful.
That's how I do laundry.
Yeah, but I'm like that way too. I want to get everything done. You want to make sure that you can sort of slide things in and out, but also you want to be able to revise and update that stuff at will. These are also some steps to kind of make things easier. But Pedro, what are some things that you've done to kind of keep your vigor and have kept you connected to teaching and not lost the passion for the job?
Well, because it's philosophy and religion I teach, we're dealing with life's most important questions oftentimes. Mm-hmm. That's how I say it to the students.
That's how you frame it.
Well, that's how I frame it, because for that very reason, I want them to think, and I have to remind myself too, these aren't just academic exercises we're doing, but we're talking real lives, real people.
Yeah.
And this is true for so many subjects in so many areas, where there's been times during class discussion where a student will start to get emotional because of the subject matter, and it was touching upon something that they're going through in their lives that none of us had no idea. Mm-hmm. Here's a specific example. We were doing an ethics class. We were talking about a man, and this was a case study we were discussing and the morality of it. So a man who's married, he has 3 children, he's had a year-long affair with his secretary who's now leaving for another job, mm-hmm. and they both decided, in the case study, they both decided to end it, so it wasn't ugly, she just moved to another state, got a new job. And so the ethical issue we were discussing is, should this man, who's been having an affair for a year, but has decided to end it along with, they both decide, should he tell his wife? Mm-hmm. Because what if he tells his wife and the family gets divorced and the kids are crushed? But if they stay together, is this wrong because he's been keeping this from her the whole time? So a classic case of deontological ethics versus consequentialism. And so during the discussion, and you better believe me, there's differences of opinion here as to what he should do, one of the students started to cry because her family was going through that at that moment. I mean, in her life. And so this was very real for her. So I tell this story just to say, I have to remind myself that, yes, it is academics we're doing because we're in school, but it's much more than that. So I try and keep that perspective to say, we're talking about things that extend way beyond the classroom.
To kind of, to wrap this up at the same time and to connect it to what we'll talk about next time, ultimately, when it comes to any job or any field, is that even relationships, you have to find a way to keep the passion going. And whether that's a reinvention of yourself, reinvention of your lesson plans, one way to do that is to find out the things that you're connected to outside and try to bring them into the classroom. And I'll bring up a great example next time in regards to one of our math colleagues, in the math department, who put a spin on one of his own math projects. And we'll kind of talk about that a little bit, but to kind of see when you create this personal connection of things that you're passionate about and you can tie it to your work, that also gives you longer shelf life. And next time we come back to you, our next episode, we will be talking about bringing your personality into the classroom and how that sort of diversity can help you change the tone, change the scope of different things, and ultimately give you that longer timeline in terms of teaching and keep you up to date, not just with what you teach, but also with your students. Pedro, anything to add before we shut it down here?
Just to say, if you've listened to this entire podcast or any others, thank you for doing so. Any suggestions or comments, always feel free to share them, because even though we're teachers, like everyone else, we are lifelong learners.
Yes, and we are open to suggestions and critique, and despite what other people might have told you, we do and can read. So please let us know however you want to get a hold of us. So until then, Auf Wiedersehen, say adios.
Adios.
Muchachos.
Until next time.
Until next time. Hello again, everyone. We hope you enjoyed episode 4 of Classroom Hacks, Evolution and Longevity. Please be sure to also check out the bonus content for this episode, where I interviewed one of my close friends, Karen Nguyen, who just completed her first year as a high school teacher and also picked up a job as an adjunct instructor for a college. We talk about the differences between high school and college teaching, the hurdles she faced as a first-year teacher, and the interview process for both the high school and collegiate levels. Carrie also provides plenty of helpful examples in regards to projects and activities she's used in her very own classrooms. Lastly, I just wanted to take a moment to remind you to check out duringofficehours.com. For most of us, the semester has just started. We're back into the groove of things, and maybe we're looking to try some new techniques out this semester. So duringofficehours.com has just what you're looking for when it comes to new activities, practical wisdom, creative projects, and outside-the-box methods. Why wait to try some of these great ideas out in your own class? Duringofficehours.com. Teach, share, learn.